Welcome to Crossroads, a show by the Epoch Times, one of America's largest independent newspapers that brings you insights beyond the headlines. Now make sure to hit that like button, leave a comment, subscribe to our show. Again, you get updates on when the next show is, and of course, all of our great content, and you help us reach more people. Now look, a new National Guard force to react to incidents of civil unrest is being considered by Donald Trump. You can see it already happening. Los Angeles, for example, now Washington, D.C., and he's talking about doing it in 5 additional states already. The Washington Post alleges that unreleased documents propose a new, quote, domestic civil disturbance quick reaction force. And this appears to follow the model he's using already in other areas, like the one he used to put down the riots in Los Angeles, the new anti-crime forces in Washington, D.C., all of this, right? Let me show you what the Washington Post said. They said this: the Trump administration is evaluating plans that would establish a, quote, domestic civil disturbance quick reaction force, kind of like your special forces National Guard deployed to go put down a riot or something. It says composed of hundreds of National Guard troops tasked with rapidly deploying into American cities facing protests or other unrest, according to an internal Pentagon document reviewed by the Washington Post. It says this: the plan calls for 600 troops to be on standby at all times so they can deploy in as little as 1 hour. Now, 600 troops is not enough to put down a nationwide riot or something like that. You'd probably need a few hundred just to deal with one riot. In fact, if we look at the model for Los Angeles, but of course, this seems to be if you have a large incident of some kind, and also deployed very quickly. The ability to do this means that you probably have groups throughout the United States, because 1 hour response time, you would need to be relatively close, even by flight. This does appear to be some kind of nationwide effort. Now they note as well, they would be split into 2 groups of 300 and stationed at military bases in Alabama and Arizona, with purview of regions east and west of the Mississippi River, respectively. Cost projections outlined in the document indicate that such a mission, if the proposal is adopted, could stretch into the hundreds of millions of dollars, should military aircraft and aircrews also be required to be ready around the clock. We'll see. Look, they already it's the military. They already have these things on standby typically. And it said troop transports via commercial airlines would be less expensive, the documents say, which they're doing too, especially with the deportation efforts. They've already commissioned a lot of civilian aircraft. It says the proposal, which has not been previously reported, represents another potential expansion of President Donald Trump's willingness to employ the armed forces on American soil. Okay, let's step back. Trump's willingness to employ the armed forces on American soil. How many of you remember when, during the COVID lockdowns, National Guard was marching down the street and shooting people with pepper balls if they stepped outside their houses during the lockdowns? I seem to recall that. How many of you remember during the Biden inauguration when they surround the Capitol building with concertina wire and giant fencing and deployed the National Guard in Washington, D.C.? Gee, I remember this. How many of you remember that a lot of these same individuals deployed the National Guard for civil unrest? I remember it. They're making it seem like only one side does it and like we've never seen it before. It's a total misrepresentation of facts, frankly. But remember, the big issue now is Trump is using it for law enforcement. That's kind of the difference here, right? They say this as well. They say it relies on a section of U.S. code that allows the Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States, to circumvent limitations on the military's use within the United States. What is that? If you are in the National Guard, you probably know about it because this is not a new thing. The National Guard can be deployed by the President, bypassing the authorization, of course, of even local governments, can be deployed to protect federal buildings and federal officers. Meaning, for example, if ICE agents are out carrying out deportation efforts, they feel they're under threat, they can legally deploy the National Guard to protect the ICE agents. If a federal government building, like a courthouse, for example, is under attack, if other federal buildings are under attack, if they even just allege it is, they can deploy the National Guard to protect that building. They cannot use them as like basically all-around law enforcement. Their job can be to protect federal assets. But if they want to bypass the thing and have them actually carry out law enforcement, then it's a little more tricky. Then they actually need, to an extent, approval from the local government. The exception being in Washington, D.C., which has a special status under the United States. Because, again, Washington, D.C. is the nation's capital. Trump can actually use National Guard for law enforcement there, bypassing local government. Even Muriel Bowser has noted this, by the way. But look, also on this, alongside all of this, there's also new proposals of various type of domestic surveillance. Kind of the shadow side of all this. Defense One actually says this: President Trump's declaration of a crime emergency in Washington, D.C., it says, will further entwine the U.S. military and its technology and equipment in law enforcement matters and perhaps, big keyword there, perhaps, expose D.C. residents and visitors to unprecedented digital surveillance. Let me detail this, but first what they said. They say, what comes next? The June 2020 deployment of National Guard units to work alongside D.C. police offers a glimpse, again, going back to what we saw during the Biden inauguration, citywide use of sophisticated intelligence gathering technologies normally reserved for foreign war zones. What are they talking about right now? There are a lot of rumors going around on the types of surveillance technologies we could see put in place. This would include one of the more controversial proposals, biometric iris scanners, things that scan the iris of your eyes, which can be used to identify maybe there's somebody on a terror watch list, maybe identify, is this person an American citizen? It identifies everybody, and they can identify who they want to deport or put in jail or whatever else. The irony of this is a lot of media are painting this as a new thing. What Defense One is noting, we actually saw some of these technologies already employed over the last 4 years, especially in Washington, D.C., where they did, in fact, deploy the National Guard for, securing the Capitol building and securing the transition of power when Biden became president. Meaning they already did it. The other side did this already, the other side of the political aisle, but they're making it sound like Trump is, Orange Hitler because he's doing the same thing that they did. My point on this, which I think is important to note, both sides have already done it. This is not as partisan as I believe they're framing it to be. But the big question is, and I think this is something people should be concerned about, what types of surveillance will they put in place? Does that violate the rights of non-criminal, normal, law-abiding Americans? And do you want to have that type of kind of all-around surveillance established, especially when we've seen many times in the past where sometimes surveillance technologies or things that violate our rights are put in place and then never removed? I'm looking at you, Patriot Act. Now look, meanwhile, on the point of crime in Washington, D.C., there's a lot of pushback against Trump's actions. There is a lot going on. A lot of this is alleging that crime is not as bad as he says it is. The basis, the foundation of Trump's actions, they're saying crime is out of hand, murders are through the roof, and we need to protect the American people from, a lack of proper justice. Now, the response from conservatives has been the statistics using to challenge this were being manipulated. And this actually goes back to recent reports not too long ago, July 18th, when the local police commander in Washington, D.C. was suspended for allegedly messing with the crime statistics. And this was not a partisan issue even a few weeks ago. It's a partisan issue now, A few weeks ago, it was not. NBC Washington said this. They said a D.C. police commander is under investigation for allegedly making changes to crime statistics in his district, meaning we can't trust the numbers. Why are they using the numbers if NBC itself said you can't trust them? It says this, quote, the Metropolitan Police Department confirmed Michael Pulliam was placed on paid administrative leave in mid-May. That happened just a week after Pulliam filed an equal employment opportunity complaint against an assistant chief, and the police union accused the department of, quote, deliberately falsifying crime data, according to 3 law enforcement sources familiar with the complaint. If they were, quote, deliberately falsifying crime data in Washington, D.C., NBC News reported it on the far left of the political spectrum, I'd say. Why are they doubting now that maybe there's something wrong with the numbers? It says this as well. The union claims police supervisors in the department, quote, manipulate crime data to make it appear violent crime has fallen considerably compared to last year. In other words, the crime statistics you're seeing being used politically right now, saying that crime is down in Washington, D.C., was, quote, being deliberately manipulated. Why are you not being told this? Why is this not being dragged out and shown to the public? Why are all the media now saying the exact opposite? Say, well, according to crime statistics, things are much better than they were last year. When most of these same media acknowledged just a few weeks ago that the numbers were being messed with. Again, look, most of the left-leaning news outlets reported this. This is not some big conspiracy theory. The one I showed you, that was from NBC. These reports are now raising questions of these same outlets pointing to crime stats, saying the opposite of what they acknowledged a few weeks ago was not reliable. Take it as you will. Also on the point of crime in Washington, the trigger for the recent Trump actions was the recent beating of a former DOJ staffer by a couple teenagers. Allegedly a couple. They're saying that one was not fully involved with it, maybe just watched or maybe cheerled from the sidelines. Now it seems the teenagers are not facing the very harsh justice that Trump is suggesting should be brought about in Washington. In fact, they're facing basically the thing that he says is problematic. They're treated as juveniles. They get a little slap on the wrist and let back on the streets. Just the News said this, quote, a Washington, D.C. judge has ordered the 2 teens charged in the attack of a former Department of Government Efficiency staffer to remain in the city's juvenile detention center, rejecting requests for less restrictive detention. It says this. The boy and girl, each 15, charged in the August 3rd attack on Edward Corstein, a 19-year-old, as they were allegedly trying to carjack a vehicle in northwest D.C. The attack was followed by President Trump announcing that the plan to take over Washington, D.C. and deploy the National Guard. It says the 2 teens who are from Maryland appeared Monday in front of Judge Kendra D. Briggs in a hearing in D.C. Superior Court, the Washington Post reported. It says the lawyer for the girls said that the teen has not been rearrested and asked Briggs to reduce her level of detention. I'm only 15 years old, Judge. I shouldn't be charged in any harsh way. That's been the narrative, right? They say that the attorney argued that her client was in the vicinity of the attack, but that there is not compelling evidence she was involved. Show me the proof, Judge. I was just watching. I was just nearby. I was just buying groceries or something, right? Now, look, meanwhile, after a white couple was beaten by a group of 6 individuals in Cincinnati, kind of the next big, race crime issue we're dealing with, well, it's interesting now. You had a group of 6 individuals charged, most of them black Americans, the individuals who were beaten, white Americans. And local community leaders are saying that the white people who were beaten are actually the ones at fault because they incited violence against them. Watch this.
6 individuals were charged with aggravated assault, which is a felony. The white guy incited or urged 6 other people to commit a felony.
The method by which this situation has been handled raises serious questions as to whether there's bias involved in the investigation. It also brings into question the possibility of a lack of integrity and whether there's something else to hide.
Imagine that. I should note there are actually similar narratives too. This is becoming one of the big narratives. In Mexico, they say that Americans are the ones responsible for the drug trade because we incite the drug cartels to sell drugs to us because we buy drugs. There are people in like African countries, some of the law enforcement there, who say the people who have nice things are responsible for theft because they incite people to rob them by having nice things. And if that sounds crazy, right here in America, they're saying that people who get beaten by groups of 6 individuals are the ones responsible for being beaten because they incited people to beat them. Now, I should note the narrative being used for this, and we haven't seen the evidence on this yet. The case is just starting. The narrative that people are alleging, and I don't know if this is true or not. There are local officials in Cincinnati talking about this. They're saying the white couple used racist language, and the racist language incited a group of 6 individuals to physically assault them. The challenge they're going to have is whether that actually represents justification for physical violence, especially if you're kicking somebody on the ground where, most people get charged with attempted murder for that. These suspects are facing up to 30 years in prison for what they did, beating these two individuals, a man and a woman. The other narrative you're going to have is, well, if we want to say that racist language is a justifiable reason to use violence, does that apply to everybody? If somebody believes they've been insulted by discrimination, does that justify you using extreme violence against them? If a trans individual feels that they've been misgendered, you're discriminating against me, do they have the legal right to beat the person physically who did that? Even getting together with a group of people, maybe 6 people, to beat a person. If a white American believes that somebody calls them a racist name like cracker or something like that, does that justify them to use group violence against the person who called them a racist name? In other words, if you allow that type of legal loophole against one identity group, do you allow it for everybody? And what kind of a country do we create if we do that? If you have it so that offensive speech becomes justification for mob violence, what kind of country will we create? That's what hinges on that case, I'd say. Of course, I don't support racist language, but I do think we're on a kind of a cliff's edge if being offended is justification for violence. Now look, meanwhile, on the issue of Trump using the National Guard to put down civil unrest and protect federal employees, well, California is challenging whether the president has the ability to bypass local governments and deploy the military within their local districts. Well, we will soon find out. I'll be talking more about this after a quick break.
All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment. You are, of course, watching Crossroads with Joshua Philipp. I'm just here to share a message about American Hartford Gold, my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. Now, obviously, the recent tariffs have made the markets super turbulent and volatile. With every new piece of tariff news, the markets seem to either crash up or crash down. And of course, it's worth mentioning that these conditions don't only affect Wall Street. They affect all of us through our investments and our retirement accounts. That's why I'd like to introduce you to a company that I trust and I myself use to secure my own savings, American Hartford Gold. They specialize in helping Americans move our assets into something tangible, into something you can actually hold, which is physical gold and physical silver, 2 precious metals that act as a hedge against all those decisions being made in Washington, D.C. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. They have thousands of 5-star reviews, and they make the whole buying process super simple. Your metals can be shipped directly to your door, or you can transfer your current retirement account to a tax-advantaged gold IRA. And the best part is that right now, American Hartford Gold is offering an exclusive offer. When you call them today and you mention the name Joshua, you could receive up to $15,000 in free silver with your initial investment. Take advantage of their special offer. You can either just call them at 877-260-2764 or text Joshua to 65532. All their information will also be down in the description box below. And now, back to Crossroads.
Welcome back. All right, just reading the comments, I saw one of you questioned, who has more gold? Who buys more gold, me or Roman? Roman from Facts Matter. The answer is Roman. Roman hoards gold like a dragon. Roman buys a lot of gold. Now look, if you're enjoying this show, support us by hitting the like button, leave a comment, subscribe to our channel. Helps us a lot, helps get the show out to more people. And let's keep going, folks, because it's not over yet. Look, on the issue of Donald Trump using the National Guard to put down civil unrest and to protect federal employees, California is challenging whether the president has the ability to do this while bypassing the local government. Because normally the way this works is the president can authorize the deployment of the National Guard. The president gives authorization, and the local government is the one that actually has to carry out the deployment itself. There are some exceptions on how that works. For example, if they're being done to protect federal assets, employees, and buildings. But that's now being challenged, and a trial on this has now started in California. Epoch Times said this: a federal court began hearing testimony on August 11 in a trial to determine whether President Donald Trump illegally used National Guard troops for law enforcement in California. It says the trial is part of a broader legal debate over the federal government's power in combating lawlessness in the country. And it says on the day the trial started, Trump said he would activate National Guard troops to combat crime in Washington, which is a different legal basis than California because Washington is in fact the state at the nation's capital. It says U.S. District Judge Charles Breyer, who was overseeing the trial, previously blocked Trump's use of National Guard troops, but an appeals court halted that decision. Trump was able to keep doing it. And it said Breyer's decision had focused on whether Trump violated a federal law that directs the president to issue orders through a state's governor. The trial is focused on whether Trump violated a law known as the Posse Comitatus Act by using federal troops for civilian law enforcement. Further in, it states this: California Governor Gavin Newsom, who initially sued the administration in June, is alleging that the Trump administration violated the Posse Comitatus Act by using troops for direct involvement in civilian law enforcement activities, such as forming blockades and detaining civilians. Last week, the Justice Department argued the trial should be canceled. Among other things, it argued that the federalized National Guard troops were not executing the laws, but were instead focused on the protection of federal property and personnel performing federal functions, again, which would be under the legal basis. It said, besides, it said, another section of federal law allows the National Guard to execute the law. It was referring to Section 12406 of federal law, which allows the president to federalize the National Guard under certain conditions, including if he is, quote, unable with the regular forces to execute the laws of the United States, meaning the state is delinquent in enforcing federal law. They're allowing riots, they're allowing violations of the law, and the president is like, what are you doing? Time to bring justice back, and then sends in the troops. The big argument here in Los Angeles, which is where that whole thing hinges, is going to be, was the situation bad enough to justify this? Did the National Guard overstep the boundaries of just protecting federal buildings and protecting federal agents from riots and protests and so on? How do you judge this, right? It should be noted, of course, that Los Angeles did have riots. Police were making calls saying that they were under assault. Police themselves were saying they didn't have the ability to do this. California local police were even not asking for help from surrounding areas. I know because I talked to some of them, not even requesting help from surrounding areas. The argument for that was they said they had enough LAPD officers to handle it, and they didn't want to destabilize other areas by making them more vulnerable if the protests spread. Take it as you will. The case is moving forward now. Now, look, alongside that, though, ICE is about to get supercharged. They're about to go into overtime, right? ICE has just launched a recruitment drive, and they've now very, very quickly gotten a very large number of applicants. Within a very short time frame, they met and exceeded what they hoped to achieve. DHS said this. They said U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, today announced it has officially received over 100,000 applications from patriotic Americans who want to join ICE and help remove the worst of the worst criminal illegal aliens from the United States. They keep saying worst of the worst. Maybe they're starting with that. Eventually they want to remove all illegal aliens. So it's the narrative. The true picture of it is that they want to kind of deport everybody who's not here legally. They say this, quote, "Our country is calling you to serve at ICE. In the wake of the Biden administration's failed immigration policies, your country needs dedicated men and women of ICE to get the worst of the worst criminals out of our country," said Secretary Kristi Noem, and added, "This is a defining moment in our nation's history. Your skill, your experience, and your courage have never been more essential. Together we must defend the homeland. Join.ice.gov." And it says that U.S. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem recently announced ICE waived age limits for new applicants so that even more patriots qualify to join ICE in its mission to arrest murderers, pedophiles, gang members, rapists, and other criminal illegal aliens. And remember, entering the United States illegally is also a crime, from America's streets. It says all ICE law enforcement recruits are required to go through medical screening, drug screening, and complete a physical fitness test. On the point of them changing some of the age limit stuff, they're talking about hiring more veterans. So maybe older Americans who served in the military and are like, I want to serve my country yet again. They're going to be, I mean, again, you're not guaranteed a spot, but more eligible than you would have been if you're in the older area of that. The other side of it, too, is they can't hire everybody. They're getting a lot of people submitting their applications. And frankly, the sign-on is pretty dang good. Even from a normal job perspective, it's a really good job. They're talking about like student loan forgiveness if you join ICE. They're talking about like this huge sign-on bonus. Even from a normal perspective, they're offering a pretty good job. And in case you missed it also, former Superman actor Dean Cain, he's going to be joining ICE. Watch this.
I'm actually a deputy sheriff, a sworn deputy sheriff, and a reserve police officer. I wasn't part of ICE. But once I put that out there and you put a little blurb on your show, it went crazy. So now I've spoken with some officials over at ICE, and I will be sworn in as an ICE agent ASAP. So they'll have 80,001 recruits for their 10,000 positions. It always has been for me. It's the reason I became a police officer during that time when everyone was trying to defund the police. That's when I stepped up and joined, because it makes no sense to me. It's totally insane. And this country was built on patriots stepping up, whether it was popular or not, and doing the right thing. I truly believe this is the right thing. I truly believe.
You know what that reminds me of? It reminds me of the old black and white photos of Elvis Presley when he showed up for the draft for World War II, and they're like, doing his weight checks and stuff like that. We're at it again. We're at it again. Now, also when it comes to the new and much harsher forms of rule of law possibly coming to a street near you, a big question is going to be, well, how do they handle drug crimes? Because, there's different extents to it. I'd say most of us would say that fentanyl should not be on American streets. It kills people, it's terrible, it ruins people's lives. Fentanyl is being taken very seriously. But some argue that not all drugs are the same, and some want to reclassify marijuana in particular to be designated as less than dangerous. Wall Street Journal said this. It said President Trump is considering reclassifying marijuana as a less dangerous drug, according to people familiar with the matter, after pot companies have poured millions of dollars into Trump's political groups. They're arguing there's a financial incentive here. Further in this state this. The push centers on whether marijuana should be reclassified as a Schedule III drug, which would not make the drug entirely legal, but would ease restrictions on it. It would also allow for tax breaks for some marijuana companies and additional medical research. My take on it, look, I don't think marijuana is good for you. I know it's become more common these days. Some people need it for their, their back pain, right? Oh, my aching back, doctor, please give me something good. I understand. The argument, though, is that should it be the same, basically the same classification at certain weights as like fentanyl or like heroin or something like that. Many people argue it's not as dangerous. Some argue it's even less dangerous than alcohol. You can't really OD on it. You know, it might, one thing my dad always told me is that it makes you just kind of not want to do anything with your life. You know, often, not for everybody, but for a lot of people. It might ruin your life in other ways, maybe just takes away your drive, but you could argue, look, it's not killing people like, you know, the major drugs are, the real serious ones. It's not making you walk around like a zombie around the street in New York City. It might make you buy some like extra Cheetos at the store, or, you know, buy an extra pie at the local McDonald's or something like that. But it's not gonna like kill you typically, unless it's laced with fentanyl. Another big problem we have. The other argument for it, though, is that the deregulation of marijuana at the state level has actually caused a lot of additional problems. For example, cartels moving their operations into the United States, Chinese gangs making slave labor operations, growing it. That by legalizing it, we've created a new type of criminal enterprise in the United States. And you could argue part of this is because of red tape. Some gangs have moved their operations into America because it's cheaper to do it illegally and just get the fines than it is to do legally. And then they take actions to basically crush their competition, meaning there is a criminal element around it. A key question people would have is deregulation a way to stop that, or will it make it worse? One thing a lot of police officers also note is that, yeah, it might not be that dangerous, but it's a gateway drug. And it's not only a gateway drug for maybe kids who start smoking and then get into things like fentanyl later on, which is a problem. I don't think that's even deniable. There's also the problem that it's a gateway drug for criminals. Criminals can get involved in the market. They start developing clients and connections and other things. And then there's also other enterprises involved within those same networks. And so it does create other problems by extension. Is the responsible thing to deregulate it, decriminalize it, or whatever else, which would pull it out from the criminal markets, or would doing that make the problem of drugs worse because it leads kids and other people to do other things that are harmful? Again, a question we've not yet really answered as a nation, and there are a lot of different arguments on it. That said, questions, comments, anything you want to talk about, leave it in the chat. Let's jump into a conversation. Kenneth Harris, you're saying this. I remember training in the National Guard on a weekend on dealing with a mob of rioters. Basically, the National Guard has always been the backup to local and civil authorities responsible to a disaster or civil issues. The National Guard, you're saying, has always been the home defense force for the states. They are also the force to oppose an attempted armed coup on the federal government. Yeah, and I've been told that as well by National Guard's troops. I mean, again, like, I've never served. This is just based on what I know from reading the law and from talking to, you know, service members. What I've been told actually is that, yeah, when you're trained in the National Guard, part of what you're trained in is, in fact, civil unrest. You know, America is a unique country. The National Guard technically is the state military, which is interesting when you think about it, right? We have the federal military, the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Air Force, and you know, good old Space Command, right? But the states also have their military, the National Guard. Texas also has its own army. They're a unique state. And so because of that, there's a question. So the other legal side of it is there's the question, well, one, of how can the states use the National Guard? As Kenneth is noting, the states can use it to put down domestic, you know, issues, respond to disasters, in the same way the federal government might respond to a federal disaster, right, using the federal military. The question is, to what extent can the federal government use the state military? And, you know, this has expanded over time. From what I understand, like, for example, if you join the National Guard, you would not necessarily get deployed by the federal government to, like, a, you know, international war. Some of that changed during the very long wars that America underwent, Iraq and Afghanistan, where, you know, National Guard troops were being deployed for that in many regards. To an extent, the federal government did get more of an ability to use the National Guard. Part of that was through the authorization of states. The challenge you're now having is, to what extent can the federal government bring up the state military within the state without the authorization of the state? As Kenneth notes, the gray area is when there are threats to national security, when it comes to, again, as you say, opposing an armed coup on the federal government. If there's an attack on the federal government within the state, the federal government can use the National Guard to put that down, which is what Trump used as the basis of deploying the National Guard to Los Angeles, right? The hard point they're going to deal with legally is to what extent can the Trump administration use the National Guard as a law enforcement agency. I know that's a gray area, but I've also been told that there are some loopholes where even if Trump was using the National Guard in Los Angeles without the authorization of the Los Angeles government, that there are some interpretations of the law that he could even legally do that. We'll see how these cases go. If you want to hear my personal opinion on it, I think the legal challenges were just made to kind of put things on hold. I don't think they're going to win. I don't think they're going to win personally. I think what they're betting on is the, frankly, legal system is going to be partisan enough that you're going to have partisan-based legal determinations, and it's going to have to get dragged through the courts, probably all the way to the Supreme Court, and it's going to be a long enough timeline that it may take, 2 or 3 years, because that's the way things work in the United States. And if they can drag it through the court system for 2 or 3 years, and you have nationwide injunctions, which are continuing, by the way, they're just using different names for it, because remember the Supreme Court got rid of nationwide injunctions. They just use different names for it. They're still ongoing. I think they're banking on the ability to do that and block or disrupt Trump enough to where he's not able to fully do what he wants to do by the time the next presidential elections come up. That's what I see happening. And that's just my personal take on it, right? Right side, you're saying, whatever happened to sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Yeah, you're talking about the Cincinnati thing where there are effectively local, I don't know what you call them, I would call them community organizers, right? What is a community leader, right? What defines a community leader? Am I a community leader? I don't know. What even defines that? But you have community leaders coming out and saying that the use of name calling justifies mob violence effectively. I think it's ridiculous. I think part of it is because we've been kind of propagandized, I'd say, to believe that insulting language, racist language, discriminatory language is like the worst thing that could happen to you, that it's like worse than physical violence. The propaganda we've been subjected to over the last 10 plus years has been along those lines. If somebody uses a racist name, it's a national headline. One person anywhere in the country uses a racist name, not against white people, against anybody else. It will literally be front page news. Like they make that big of a deal about it. And because of that, a kid gets bullied in school, front page news. Someone, hangs up there was the guy like NASCAR who had a pulley on a door, and they said it looked like a noose. It turned out it wasn't. And they said that was national news, a national scandal. Like minor things that would have just been deemed like moderately offensive in the past have been framed as more important than murder. Because while you had, 12-year-old gets called racist name in, middle America somewhere, how many murders do you have every single day? You had racism getting framed as a bigger issue than murder. And I'm not saying I'm making any arguments for either side of that. But my point is, we've been conditioned to view it as that big of a deal. And because of this, people, when they get offended by stuff, they've come to believe that extreme action is justified based on what is just name calling. Now, let's go back, right? I had a funny experience with my 15-year-old daughter where I was trying to explain to her that people used to not get as offended as easily when I was a kid. And, this is me being 40-year-old dad talking to 15-year-old girl, right? 15-year-old daughter. And I had a re-education program with her. We went and we watched Richard Pryor. Anybody ever watch Richard Pryor, the comedian? It was fantastic. She was like this the whole time, like couldn't believe what she was hearing, Oh my gosh, people talked like that? Yeah, they did. I showed her Blazing Saddles. I did it. I showed her Blazing Saddles, a movie that was funny at the time. You'd get thrown in the gulag if you made that movie these days. I did. I went there, folks. I showed her Dave Chappelle. I showed her Dave Chappelle from the 90s. I did. I went that far. Black comedian, the kind of stuff we used to find really funny back in the 90s. She was like this the whole time. Oh my gosh, you guys used to talk like that when you were kids? Yes, we did, and we weren't offended by it. We thought it was funny. I showed her Uncle Ruckus. I did it. Anybody ever watch Boondocks? It was on BET, Black Entertainment Tonight. It was funny. Uncle Ruckus. We used to think he was funny. People are offended by it now. Yeah, Saturday Night Live, everybody's talking about it. People used to be less offended by this stuff. And look, in my opinion, when you can make light of stuff and you can laugh about it or be like, yeah, that was offensive, that guy's a jerk, but I don't care. Life is better. If you make a big deal about everything, you're going to be miserable. If you make everything that is offensive a detrimental act against your well-being, you are going to be miserable. The best way to deal with uncomfortable things is to take it lightly. I know that may sound crazy these days. Take it lightly. Don't be so offended. Joke around. I guess you can't do it these days without getting canceled. We used to joke around about it. And that was normal. And we didn't care. We thought it was funny. Or at the very most, we just thought somebody was being a jerk. And that was it. And I think we've gone very far from that. And I think the result of it is a perpetually offended population that makes a big deal about everything that we shouldn't be making big deals about. And it results in things like in Cincinnati, where 6 people are facing 30 years in prison for beating a couple, allegedly, because they said something offensive. You want to go to 30 years in prison for being offended? Like, what is this, right? Anyway, my take on it. Chester Axley. My daughter doesn't look at me the same anymore, by the way. I got to go watch like My Little Pony with her now or something to try to make up for it. But anyway. Chester Axley, you're saying, well, they always use the free speech narrative, so here in America, we have the right to speak our mind without persecution. If you are a U.S. citizen, plus if you do an adult crime, you do the adult time. It is designed to think before you do. Yeah, the old problem of consequences of actions, right? The thing that people these days don't want to fess up to. You're, of course, talking, I believe, about crime in Washington, D.C. And, Trump's argument that the big problem we have is juvenile crime. Judge Jeanine Pirro, now the U.S. attorney there in Washington, she's talking about that also. I mean, how do you deal with that, right? How do you deal with juvenile crime and how do you treat it? That's a real big question. I mean, it's a hard issue, right? The reason we have juvenile hall, the reason you have rehabilitation programs for kids who commit crimes is because kids do stupid things. And do you want to... The argument is that if you take a 13-year-old or a 14-year-old and you throw them in, the way they would normally do it is they'd go to juvenile hall. Then when they turn 18, if they're still serving time, they get transferred to a normal prison, right? But the argument against that is, well, are you creating basically a career criminal? If you take a kid, you pull them out of school, you put them and surrounded by criminals, and they're basically raised by other criminals, what kind of an adult are you creating? Now, the other side of it is, well, what kind of an adult are you creating if you tell them it's okay to rob somebody at gunpoint? You're not going to go to prison. You're going to go do yoga for a couple months in a juvenile hall, and then you're going to get let back out on the streets where you're left with your friends again to go rob someone at gunpoint yet again. Some of those kids have already dropped out of school, and everybody's a winner these days, so they're going to graduate anyways, right? They get the old participation trophy diploma. Is that good? I don't know. I personally know people who've changed their lives. I can tell you a few stories. I won't name names, I guess, but I have a friend, a very close friend, who, when he was a kid, was in a gang, changed his life, very different now. When he was younger, he was in a gang. This is a terrible story, because remember, he was a different person at the time. This was in the 90s in New York. The 80s in New York. Went to Central Park. There's a guy hanging out on the grass with a shotgun with like a side handle where you cock it. The kid, this friend of mine goes, "Hey, can I check out your gun? Nice gun." The guy's like, "Yeah, sure." Takes the gun, points to the guy, robs him, steals the gun. He's in his backyard shooting a shotgun in New York, right in the 80s. Of course, people hear it and call the police. Police come, show up. He freaks out, fires at them. These days, they would shoot you for it. Police in the 80s, NYPD, were a different breed. They just beat him senseless. They beat him senseless, because that's the way they used to do it. Now, you could argue, well, you know what? That's abuse and use of force. These days, they shoot you for it. I'd rather get beaten than shot. He got thrown in juvenile hall because he was underage at the time. He said that, you know what, he's like, yeah, it wasn't that bad. If you behaved well, they put you in like a separate wing, and you could have, the thing he remembers is they had peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Any time of day, you could make yourself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and he had a great time with that. He got out, got pulled back into crime. Eventually, after a couple years, decided to change his life, became religious, had a kid, never went back to it, and is a very different person now. My point is, you do have people who reform themselves. I have another person I know, when he was like 12 years old, he was robbing houses. Look, again, robbing houses, got caught, had the police called on him. The police gave him a warning. That warning set him straight. He's now a police officer. He's now a police officer, one of the best people I know. Very religious, good family, changed his entire life. One of the best people I know. And so, my point is, I understand both sides to it. I don't think you should have no consequences, and the message that there will be no consequences, especially when you're like hurting people, right? The other side is people do change, and sometimes being offered a second chance can change your life. I think the question is, how do you identify who can change their lives and who wants to change their lives? And how do you deal with that? Again, I understand both arguments with this. I know people who've changed their lives. I know people who've changed a lot. And I don't know what the proper balance is to it. With Washington, D.C., I think the problem they have, though, is it's gone too far. It's gone to the extent where you have teenagers now who just think they're never going to face justice, and they act with impunity. They believe that they have even a justifiable right to do whatever they want. And when you're going around robbing people, killing people, stealing people's cars, and you think you're cool doing it, and you think nothing is ever going to happen to you, yeah, something needs to be done because it's getting out of hand. When it becomes that bad, you need to do something about it. What that thing is, you tell me, but you need to do something about it. because the examples I mentioned were people who changed their lives after facing some degree of justice, right? They did meet with the justice system, and that changed their lives. If they never meet the justice system, what will incentivize them to change their lives, right? That's the question. Chester Axley, you're saying, well, they always use the free speech narrative. So here in America, we have the right to speak our mind without prosecution or persecution. If you're a U.S. citizen, plus if you do an adult crime, you get it. Oh, sorry, I already asked that. I'm sorry. Jared Donahue, you're saying 5 times people have died from fentanyl than Vietnam. Yeah, it's crazy, right? It's crazy. Yeah, to your point, fentanyl has killed more Americans than the Vietnam War. More Americans than a full-scale war when we had a draft. Let that sink in. The people it's killing, a lot of them are your young war-fighting Americans. I've noted many times before, the Chinese Communist Party actually publicly lists drug warfare as part of its unrestricted warfare program. They regard drugs as a tool of war. And if you understand that drugs are killing as many Americans every year as a war, more so actually, they're fighting a war against us. They're killing us. They're killing our kids. You know, I lost one of my best friends to opioids, actually. One of my best friends in high school died from it. And, you know, his story was he was in a really bad car accident. The other person died. It was horrible. They put him on painkillers. He barely survived. Rehabilitation took I think he was rehab for from the car accident for a year. During that time, he got addicted to opioids. We didn't know it. He went out drinking one night. The mixture of opioids and alcohol killed him. His little brother found him dead at the bottom of the staircase. It was horrible. You know, I'd imagine most people, if you have not experienced it, you probably know somebody who has, because so many Americans have been killed by opioids. It's horrible. You know, I saw I lost one of my best friends. I saw what happened to his family. It is devastating. Some people never recover from the loss of a loved one, especially if it's your kid, right? Especially if it's a teenager or someone in their early 20s, you never recover from that fully. His little brother was devastated, right? And if you understand that this is just being allowed to continue, it's crazy. It's really crazy. So, you know, and again, the question is, what do you do about it, right? Yeah, the argument has been, well, give them a safe space to do it. They have a new form of I don't think it's called fentanyl anymore. They have a new opioid coming out now that you cannot save someone with using Narcan. Because, you know, Narcan has been the lifesaver with fentanyl. Narcan doesn't save them anymore. And so you have people, they overdose, they're dead. They're just going to die. And that's on our streets right now. And you might think, well, you know what? I didn't raise a druggie. You have kids smoking marijuana that's been laced with fentanyl and they die. You have kids getting offered a pill. Maybe they're in college and someone's like, oh, hey, take this. It'll help you focus on your test. It's synthetic. They don't know it. They die. You have parents losing kids who are, you know, top of their class, straight A students in college, starting their lives, and they get killed like that. Just boom, one day done. And so this isn't a drug problem like we used to think of a drug problem. And I go back to the point, this is being done intentionally. The Chinese Communist Party calls this drug war. Why are we not treating it like we're at war with China? Why are we not regarding it like that? They're killing more Americans every year than a full-scale war. Why are we not treating it like that? Why are we asleep at the wheel? Why are we letting us just invest like crazy in China? Why are we buying into it? Why are we making trade deals with it? Why are we letting them extend their laws into America, persecuting Americans on American soil? And we don't take it seriously because we're making money. Why are we not treating it that way? It's crazy to me. Absolutely crazy. And I do hope we start taking it seriously, at the very least, on the drug front. We will see, though. James George, you're saying Hollywood, the TV industry, and the woke crowd have gone ballistic over Dean Cain joining as an ICE agent. I saw that. I did see that. You have a lot of actors basically saying that Dean Cain's career is over. I mean, how do you do it, right? This is the problem. I've been told this by a lot of actors. I've been told this by people in the industry. The Hollywood industry is more so on the far left. They have been, it's changing to an extent, right? Because they're getting rid of some of that stuff. The problem you have is this. Think of the actors who've been canceled by the, more woke politics side. Dean Cain, I guess now. Gina Carano, she got canceled. Clint Eastwood, he got canceled. A lot of them have actually gone on to be fairly successful, right? Think of the actors on the other side who were not canceled by Hollywood, but who came out and, criticized conservatives and had their careers destroyed. Think of the comedians who ruined their careers by getting involved in partisan politics against the other side. Quite a lot. I won't name names, but quite a lot. The issue is that Hollywood is basically coming to terms with the fact people have rejected, they lost the culture war. They lost the culture war. People are rejecting woke politics. People are rejecting identity politics. If they put scenes in Disney movies that, conservative, religious Americans reject, the movie's probably going to fail. You saw this more times than I think I need to even list. And so, it's kind of gone the other way. The other side is you have new forms of entertainment coming up. Look, you have small movies doing better at the box office. I wouldn't call them independent, like mid-range independent, doing better than Hollywood films. Hollywood films are failing. Not all of them, but a lot of them are. And the ones doing very well, they're kind of part of this new ecosystem coming about because people are so sick of it. And you have, let's put it this way. Canceling people only works when you do it against a few people. When you cancel entire swaths of an industry, when you cancel half the country, they're not going to go die in a hole somewhere. They're going to create an alternate economy, which is what we saw. You have you have not even one new, you have several new film industries starting up, independent ones being ran by the people who were canceled. You have new media coming about, lo and behold, of people who were rejected by the establishment system. And ironically, the new market ecosystem, even though I'm part of that, I guess, we've come up in a denied environment, denied advertisers, denied support to a large extent, have established, because of that pressure, because of that difficulty, very solid business models that are very hard to get rid of. And this is winning against this. And so, they're canceling Dean Cain. Dean Cain ain't going away. I would actually imagine Dean Cain will probably become a pretty big star if he goes back into film because of this. I'm calling it now, right? Another question here, Jen Reinbald, you're saying, you have to adhere to the School of Frankfurt to be a community leader. Good old Frankfurt School, Columbia University, right? The School of Marxist Studies. Yeah, anyway. Yeah, that does seem to be the case. I think you're partly joking, but I think it's actually partly true. The Frankfurt School established, to a large extent, kind of the ideological basis of American communism. And, that was the basis of a lot of the free love movement in the United States in the 60s and so on. And, went on to establish the idea of, hey, socialism isn't what you think it is and so on. A lot of modern communism and what they call cultural Marxism in America was established by the Frankfurt School. And it is the case that a lot of the community organizers, they use a combination of Saul Alinsky, right, the guy who dedicated his book to Lucifer, who he called the first rebel, right, dedicated his book to the devil, and between that and also the Frankfurt School, which works as the ideological basis. Saul Alinsky established the foundations of how it operates, community organizers. Frankfurt School established the mind of the system, the communist basis of it all. And you do have people going around training these people and teaching these people and creating, they call it community organizing, right? Community organizers who are effectively your destabilizing factors, telling people that they should be offended by everything, and getting people involved in social movements that don't benefit them in any way, but instead tell them they should demand that everybody pay them and give them money and support them because that's what they deserve. I think these people are the cause of a lot of the problems these communities have, because they're telling people you're not responsible for yourself. You don't have to, work hard to change your life. You should just demand that somebody else changes your life by giving you free handouts. I don't think that makes anybody's life better, personally. Science Chick 72, you're saying, Josh, don't become a brony. Talking about My Little Pony. Look, I raised a daughter. I have watched that show with her. I'm not proud of this. But you know what? I love my little girl, and I don't care. Don't worry, I'm not watching it on my free time, though, so don't worry. She is going to make me watch K-pop Demon Hunters with her, though. I regret to inform you. Pray for me. Whatever you do, keep me in your thoughts. I'm going to watch it with my little girl because I'm that kind of dad. Right? So, I don't care. When you have a daughter, you got to give them horseback rides and, let them humiliate you a little bit. And it's just what it is to be a dad. Everybody, that said, thank you for being here. Thank you for putting up with me. And that said, please don't forget to like this video. It really helps us a lot. Let me know in the comments what you think. What do you think about free speech? I do think this is an important issue because we've kind of made bullying and offensive language out to be like the worst thing that could happen to you. When I was growing up, even in the 90s, it was not like that. I know it was even less so like that in the 70s and the 80s. Do you think we should go back to just learning to be less offended by everything? Or do you think that we should go the other way and say that you can physically beat somebody if they offend you? What kind of a society do you think we're going to create by doing that? Let me know in the chat what you think. How seriously should we treat offensive language? In Europe, they're going very far the other way. In Europe, you can go to jail for offensive language. Do you think we should do that? Tell me. That said, join me again tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. As always, please don't forget to like this video. It helps us a lot. And also, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.